Hello, everybody. We are just about to get started, but we're really excited to have um, Jennifer Jones with us today from Google Cloud. Hello. Oh, I'm currently streaming and playing in the same place. And we're going to have Jennifer Jones from Google Cloud, who's going to be talking about staying true to you during an interview. So make sure that you get all of your questions ready for the end when you get to ask some questions, and be ready to take in loads and loads of information. It's fantastic to have you here today, Jennifer. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone. I really appreciate you allowing me to be able to chat with you today. And as mentioned in that wonderful introduction, my name is Jennifer, but everyone tends to call me Jen, so feel free to do so as we chat throughout the day today. And as I mentioned, I will be walking you through how to make sure your amazing personalities are incorporated in your interviews in a way that feels authentic and true to you, while also sharing some really cool Google tips to help you prepare for your technical interviews with us. And as someone who has interviewed with Google 3 times, I can assure you, you are in great hands today. Okay. So, and another cool fun fact, I have always had London on my vision board. And so the fact that I'm even speaking to you all today makes me feel like I'm one step closer to knocking that off of my list. So welcome to everyone here. And again, the topic of my discussion today is staying true to you during an interview. So just a few reminders here as we progress throughout the workshop today. Please do not record this event personally. It is being recorded for you, and we are also live streaming as well. So please do not record, but feel free to take a ton of notes. If at any point during my presentation today you want me to slow down or repeat anything, I'm happy to do so. I really want this to feel super, intimate and comfortable enough for you to ask whatever questions you need during this time. In terms of engagement, go ahead and share your thoughts and any questions that you may have that pop up during the workshop right in the chat box. I will be checking through it throughout my workshop today, and we'll be saving some time at the end to go over any questions that you may have or comments that you've made. So if you're like me and you tend to forget things in the moment, go ahead and put it right in the chat feature, and then we can discuss it toward the end of my tips and tricks today. Lastly, don't forget to utilize the closed caption features located right at the bottom at the screen there. You can just simply click CC, and that'll kind of help you as we progress throughout today. I also just wanted to throw out this quick disclaimer. I am home, and so with that comes some action. Hopefully, I've done everything to bribe my dog today in hopes that, that he won't make an appearance. But if he does, I just ask for a little bit of grace as we get through our presentation today, okay? Well, without further ado, I hope you all are ready and excited as I am to be chatting with you today, so we can jump right into the first thing, which is a re-intro. So for anyone who may have just joined, my name is Jennifer, but everyone tends to call me Jen, so feel free to do so throughout the presentation today. And I'm a software engineering recruiter here at Google, and my pronouns are she and her. A little fun fact about me, I started my Google journey as a contractor out of our Austin, Texas office, and as of April of 2021, I am now a full-time employee working out of our Atlanta, Georgia office. So if you're ever in the area, make sure you stop by. I am so honored again to be here with you all today as I share tips on how to prepare for our technical interviews, all while remaining authentically true to you. And so another fun fact, I'm throwing a lot of them out to you today, but as I mentioned before, have always wanted to visit London. So being one step closer to speaking with you all today is kind of making that dream come true for me. So a little bit about our agenda before I kind of dive into everything that I'll be chatting with you about today. I want to cover everything that you would need to know in order to feel comfortable during our technical interviews, while also sharing how to respond to interview questions that may come up, as well as doing it in a way where your interviewer really gets the full scope of your work. A lot of times when we go into our interviews, we tend to focus on our current work or what we're currently doing or what may have only occurred in the past year or two. But it's everything that you have done that really makes you who you are today. And so how do you incorporate all of that in a 45-minute interview? So we're going to talk about that today. We'll also cover what Google's values are and how we build for everyone. Next, I'll be providing you with an overview of our process so that you understand what the process looks like in its totality, so that you understand what to expect and how best to prepare for a technical interview with us. And finally, we'll be rounding things out, discussing our non-technical and technical interviews, of course, leaving time at the end for any questions that you may have or anything that may pop up during the time that we spend together. Okay? Cool. So we just want to make sure everybody's good. I don't want to miss any initial questions. So let's jump right in. So one of the things that I tell people to begin to think about is a company's mission, right? So our motto at Google is to build for everyone. But what exactly does that mean? And so it could take on a lot of things if you really think about it. But for us, at Google, diversity, equity, and inclusion are business imperatives for not only our employees, our products, and our users, while we are advancing a more representative, inclusive, and accessible Google. I said Google, so you might hear my Google Home in the background. But it is important to note that we are actively centering racial equity in our approach, of course. And so to learn more, if you are interested in learning more about that, you can head over to diversity.google and specifically google.com/racial equity, just in case if that's something that you're interested in learning more about. But in order for us to build for everyone, by everyone, and with everyone, we need everyone. And so in order for us to be able to do that well, we need a workforce that is representative of the users that we serve. And so when you're understanding our values and our mission, it'll help you to ensure it aligns with your goals and your values and your mission. And you'll find that if these things align, it'll be much easier for you to seamlessly bring your whole self into your interview, mainly because it's not going to be anything foreign to you, right? So if it's your desire to ultimately make a big impact, if it's to bring a service to someone who may not have known that they needed this service, or an app, or whatever the case may be, what is your why? And understanding your why will really help you throughout your interviews. And I'll explain a little bit more of that later, but really just want to harp in and understanding not only what a company's mission is and what their why is, but also understanding what yours is. That alone will help you as you begin to respond to different interview questions and really get a feel for that company. If they all align, it'll be much easier for you to be able to communicate your thoughts as well. So let's talk a little bit about preparing for your interview. So how can you build for everyone? And what I tell my candidates all the time is that when you start preparing for your Google technical interview, it begins long before your interview is even scheduled. I remind everyone that I speak with that this is the perfect time to really get to know the company that you're interviewing for, how your experience has aligned with the things that you're learning about a particular company, how those values align with you and what their mission is. Understanding our company history, the varying products that we have and services, and the global impact that they make daily will really help you to become even more excited about how you can bring whatever it is that you're looking to contribute to a company to the table. And so it's throughout that excitement that you'll easily be able to communicate exactly how you envision your contributions with your own personal twist. And after all, we love when you let your personality shine through in your interview. It's not supposed to be this stiff moment of just kind of spewing out answers, but it's really giving your interviewer a visual into who you are and what makes you who you are today. So before I share tips on how to best prepare for your interviews, let's talk a little bit about what our process looks like. Okay, so in the short story would be your technical phone screen, 4 interviews, and then your offer. So let's break each one of those down. After speaking with your recruiter, hopefully me, and having identified what your short and long-term goals are, and that's really what your recruiter is doing in that initial phone call, is understanding a little bit more about what it is that drives you. Why are you looking for new opportunities? What do you want your future career to look like 1, 3, 5 years from now? So that discovery call is really more than just letting you know about a particular role, but it's really getting some insight into who you are and what makes you tick. And so that is a part of why it is so important to understanding your mission and your values and your own personal brand. Because when that question does come up, who are you? What do you want? What are you looking for? You need to be able to answer that question with confidence in knowing what it is that you can bring to a particular table. Next, the process starts with a 45-minute technical phone screen. So this is a 45-minute phone interview with a Google software engineer. If all goes well after that technical phone screen, then you'll advance to 4 additional on-site. In this case, we're conducting our interviews virtually. So you'll then proceed to 4 interviews. One of those interviews will be a Googliness or leadership non-technical interview. I always giggle for Googliness. I just think it's the cutest word. But anyway, so during this interview, this is where a lot of candidates really start to incorporate their personal brand and who they are, because it's during this interview that we really want to understand a little more about you, right? Your individual work style, how you approach teamwork, and how you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. So these questions during this non-technical interview tend to be a mixture between hypothetical, so scenarios that you may have yet to face in your career, based on scenarios that you may have not faced before, rather, I apologize. Or they can be behavioral questions. So these are questions based on your previous experiences. So not only are you going to be giving your interviewer insight into, how you handled something in a current role or past role, but we're also going to mix in some questions to understand how you would potentially approach a future situation as well. So it's a good mix during these interviews. After your interviews, your interviewer and your recruiter will begin to gather all of that feedback from your interviews, and then it is your recruiter who will be reaching out to you regarding next steps, and of course, hopefully offering an offer to join us here at Google. So let's talk a little bit about the non-technical interview a little bit better, and that is better known as our Googliness and leadership interview. Cool. So in addition to your technical interviews, as I mentioned before, you will have one 45-minute non-technical interview. And this, again, is an interview that is dedicated to really understanding your leadership skills and your experience. So you want to be prepared to discuss how you may have used your communication and decision-making skills to mobilize others. How are you leading without the title of being a leader? This could include how you were able to help others, or maybe you helped your team succeed on a project. But really, it's a time for your interviewer to understand how you work. What do you like in the workspace, both individually and or on a team? So some examples of a behavioral question could be, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. So interviewers are looking for examples of what you have done, how you have done it, and they may follow up with questions like, what was the result, or what did you do then? So this is, again, is a perfect time for you to start to really take inventory of everything that you have done. And this is where I tell a lot of candidates too, again, why your prep starts long before you're even scheduled, is because it is very difficult to remember everything that you have done over the course of 1, 3, 5 years in a 45-minute interview. And so I tell people all the time, take inventory of things that you've done. If you've mentored someone, if you've provided some kind of tutoring, if you led a project, completed a project, anything dealing with team collaborations or working individually on a project, keep a running tab of everything that you've done so that when it is time to interview, you're finding that you're spending less time thinking of things to say, and more time having really good, healthy dialogue with your interviewer. And that is a tip that was told to me my 3rd time interviewing with Google, and it is probably the best piece of advice that I have was ever given. And so I just tell everybody the same thing. Behavioral questions are questions that look at how you've handled a specific challenge that you were presented in the past, and it assesses if you're a good match for the role. And so another thing that you want to keep in mind is not being afraid to pull on everything that you have done, whether it was a project that maybe you didn't hit the deadline for. It's okay. We want to break down what happened, and being able to provide a visual throughout your interview is key. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Sample requirements that we look for when you're responding during your non-technical interview are things like your communication, right? How do you make decisions? Did you take initiative? How did you stay organized? How did you manage your time? Were you flexible? What are your leadership capabilities like? And how, again, do you problem solve? And you're going to hear that a lot during this presentation, but it is super, super important for you to understand. Now, I had mentioned earlier that you could also get a mixture of what's called hypothetical or situational questions. Those sound a lot like, imagine that you were a leader of a group and XYZ happens. So these questions are designed to really assess your thought process versus a right or wrong answer. And so a lot of times this particular interview can get a little tricky, because if you're going into an interview thinking you have to be perfect, these questions can throw you off a little bit, especially if they haven't happened to you before. And so what's super, super important when you're responding to not only your behavioral questions, but also your hypothetical questions, is answering interview questions using the STAR method. This method is used very widely here at Google. And so if you are not familiar with the STAR method, STAR stands for situation. So what is the challenge that you were faced with? What problem were you presented with? T stands for task. What tasks were ahead of you in order for you to overcome the challenge or problem that you were presented with? Action. So what are the actions that you took after listing what tasks needed to be done? What actions did you take against those tasks? So was it delegating? Was it pulling in a different person contact, or maybe someone else who is an expert in the field of what you need to solve? So really listing out what actions you took. And then R is the result, what the result was after you took those steps. So anytime you answer any questions from us here at Google, you want to make sure you're doing so using the STAR method. And I'll just repeat again, STAR is situation, T stands for task, A for action, and R for the result. Super important. Another thing I want to also share with you is not to be afraid to share where things may not have gone as planned, and how you were able to pivot from that, or what the lesson was that was learned. You want to make sure you're incorporating and really painting a picture for your interviewer. And one thing that I've always loved about Google is just the idea that we're not looking for perfection. I think a lot of times when you enter into an interview with us, there's this pressure to get every single thing right and nail the mark. And that is so far from the truth. We want to learn everything about you. And so we want to know of your triumphs. We want to know of times when maybe things didn't go as planned, but you were able to pivot and learn something from it and become more efficient next time. That's what we look for. We're not only looking for candidates with good lines of clean code, but we also love candidates who love to learn, right? We're a curious bunch over here. We love to take things a little further. We love to think outside of the box. And so we want candidates who are thinking differently, who are thinking bigger than we are thinking today. We want you to show up authentically and genuinely true to you because we want to know who you are, right? Cool. So I actually will pause here and just to kind of check in and see if there are any initial questions about, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I see some here. Yes, so actually I want to answer the, hi Genevieve, there was a question around what did I mean by Googliness? So it's actually a Google term. This is something that we've kind of coined ourselves. So it is really about who we are as Googlers. And so we we always assume the best of one another, never assuming the worst. We're always thinking big, always leading without the title of being a leader. So it's who we are and who makes up Google as a whole. But there isn't really a, like solid definition outside of like anything you'd find in a dictionary. It literally is like a Google coined word, but you really want to focus on those attributes that make someone googly or a leader, and that is your time management. Are you able to pivot, thriving in ambiguity, thinking big, pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone? So that hopefully will give you a really good example of what googliness means. Okay, so I do see some questions here that I will be getting to. And then I will answer some more toward the end, but keep these questions going. I'm really excited for this. And thank you for throwing your questions in here as well. Okay, so now let's talk about the technical interviews. Okay, so when you are thinking about your technical interviews, you will be getting assessed on in three main areas. So we're going to be looking at your coding proficiency and quality, which is defined as being able to code at a pace without sacrificing code quality. Okay. This also includes thinking of finding the optimal solution and testing the code, highlighting the idea and the ability to test code, and making sure that you cover that, right, during your interview. So you'll most likely have 2 to 3 coding questions or problems per interview. So each interview, you're given one problem to solve, and usually during that time, there are some follow-up questions as well, which we'll discuss a little bit further. Next thing that's being assessed is your data structure and your algorithms. So you want to translate your algorithm into working code, so that will be evaluated. And then finally, your technical communication. And this, to me, I tell my candidates all the time, it is fantastic if you can code. It is fantastic that you're able to walk your interviewer through your code, but you have got to be able to communicate your thoughts clearly, okay? So the easiest of the 3 to master, and yet sometimes the most difficult if you're not used to thinking out loud, but it's to ask clarifying questions before jumping into code. I stress this all the time with my candidates because it is not human nature, I think, as a coder to have a full blown out discussion about what you're getting ready to do, but it is vital during our interviews, and I'll chat a little bit more about that as we progress. But remember, your interview, think of it more of a conversation with a potential coworker And another great opportunity to showcase your personality, because now your interviewer is going to get some insight into how you approach problems, how you communicate your thoughts, and then of course, how you code. One thing, I'll share 2 fun tips with you that I actually share with my candidates. Our technical interviews, as well as your non-technical interview, is 45 minutes. But what I tell my candidates to do is to only time yourself for 40. One, because it's not natural for you to be timed while you're coding, right? So you want to start, again, ahead of time. Get into the rhythm of being under a timer when you're coding. And you want to time yourself for 40 minutes, because we always open up our interviews with a greet. You know, you obviously want to introduce yourself to your interviewer, and then they always save time at the end for questions. So you want to kind of give yourself a realistic amount of time. 40 minutes is fair. And that way, if you get a little extra time, you've already taught yourself how to code a problem in 40 minutes. The other thing that I can't stress enough, you're probably going to hear this a lot during my time with you, but learn to talk out loud. Okay. Communicating what you're doing during our interviews is absolutely vital. And the best way to do this, as you're working through mock problems or giving yourself problems, talk to yourself as well. I did it for months. And obviously I'm not a coder, but there's so many aspects to our interview where you have to learn how to talk out loud and be able to communicate your thoughts in a way that is clear and concise. But if you're doing that ahead of time, on the day of your interview, it'll flow and it'll also feel natural to you, which again is allowing you to be able to showcase yourself authentically. Okay. So now we want to talk a little bit about the assessment. So what are we assessing during our technical interviews? And again, how you're able to incorporate your brand through that as well. So during your technical interview, you could be asked to solve a problem in any way that you choose. And then your interviewer would then ask additional follow-up questions to gain clarity around your approach. And so what's super, super important about this is, again, we're not looking for perfection.
Created our technical space Wayfinder with a host of critical
okay, so another thing that you want to kind of focus on is what your interviewer is looking for. So there are a couple of things. The first is a sharp approach to problems. Now you're probably thinking, what is a sharp approach, right? Sharp can take on many definitions here. Obviously, getting to a solution adds a bit of sharpness to your problem solving. But the key thing that I want you to remember here is being able to approach a problem with a clear and concise plan. One of the things that a lot of candidates do is once the problem is presented to them, they jump right into a solution. And that is actually not, I want to say the worst thing that you could do, but taking your time and approaching something strategically and methodically is what your interviewer is going to be looking for. And so having a sharp approach to problems, very concise, very focused approach is what they're going to be looking for. And the best way to do that is to take a moment before responding, get your thoughts together, and then proceed with responding. That will allow you to have a sharp approach. The next thing that your interviewer is going to be looking at is your language syntax and your programming skills. They're also going to be looking for your ability to write quick code fixes to solve immediate problems. So are you able to, point out a mistake maybe in your code, or maybe you notice something could be done differently to make it more efficient? Are you able to write a quick code fix for that? They're also going to be assessing your ability to use your analytical skills to explain your answer, even if it's not the right answer, with well-supported reasoning. Okay, so this kind of goes back to what I mentioned before about us not necessarily looking for perfection. Sometimes if your answer is maybe not what your interviewer was looking for, are we able to start to incorporate your thought process? So this again is a perfect time for you to be able to inject a little bit of your personality. One thing we look for is, how are you backing up what you're sharing with me right now, right? How can I make sure that this person is in line with what they're saying and have facts or data to back it up? And that's what they're looking for. A very well thought out, complete thought, but having the facts and data to back up what it is that you're sharing with your interviewer. Okay. One thing that I always stress too is that we do not ask trick or brain teaser questions. So you're not going to answer how many marbles can fit in a school bus or why manhole covers are round. That is not what you're going to be answering during our interview. So I always wanted to throw that out there because I know that is like a thing for Google. Okay, so next is something that is also super, super important as well, and that is your communication and collaboration. So I talked about this before, and I wanted to share with you a little bit of my story when interviewing at Google. As I mentioned before, I did interview 3 times, and the very first time that I interviewed, I had been recruiting for a little under 7 years, I think, at that point. So I had been recruiting for a while. And honestly, I thought I knew everything that there was to know about recruiting. There wasn't anything that I would be asked that I didn't think that I couldn't answer. And so I had a very rude awakening when, my interview did not go well. And it wasn't until this 3rd time around that I learned one of my biggest mistakes was rushing to my solution. I never took a moment to think. I never took a moment to really understand what was being asked of me and really breaking down any information that I was given to make sure that my response was not only in line with what the interviewer was asking me for, but to also have a very clear, thought out process in my response. And so again, I cannot stress enough being able to confidently communicate your thoughts, understanding your why, and understanding, how you learn, how you approach problems is vital. So we're going to talk about that a little bit on this slide. The first thing you want to do during your interview that is super, super important is verbalizing your thoughts. Okay. So you want to make sure you understand the question. You want to think before you even begin to write code. Your interviewer is going to ask you a question and they're going to leave the rest up to you. And so you have to then take a moment, ask them clarifying questions, understand what the end result is going to be. And while you're doing that, your interviewer is also gaining some insight into how you approach problems and why you think that approach is the best. And you don't want to start coding a thing until you've asked those clarifying questions. And if you're still unsure, gain more clarity. It's okay to ask questions during our interviews. Again, your interviewer is not there to trip you up in any way. If you need to assume something before you code, you want to verbally check if it's a correct assumption. So again, totally fine to have this dialogue with your interviewer, completely fine to ask questions to make sure that you're nailing it and heading in the right direction. If you're anything like me, I'm a visual learner. I also like to draw. Actually, I wish I had my notebook. I would show you. I literally was drawing my thoughts out during my interview. Totally fine to do that with us as well. If you're someone that likes to kind of draw your ideas out first, or maybe you have a couple of keywords that you want to jot down before you start to speak exactly what you're thinking, let your interviewer in on that. Let them know what you're doing, and they want to see everything that makes up you, how you approach problems again. And if it is involving doodling or drawing out your thoughts, don't be afraid to do that. We want to see everything. Okay, they really want to understand how you're analyzing the problem and arriving at a line of reasoning, even through visuals, if that's the case. Next up, you want to describe how you want to tackle solving each part of the question. So if your question involves how would you bake a chocolate cake, right? You're not just going to say, oh, I'll mix all the ingredients together and toss them in the oven at 350 for 10 minutes until it's nice and moist on the inside. That's an okay answer, right? But we really want to hear everything. So we're going back to the STAR method. What's the situation? I need to make a chocolate cake. What's the task? You want to go to the grocery store. I need to pick up all of these ingredients. I need to make sure I have this person ready in the kitchen in case I burn it, you know? And then the result. The cake was perfect. They paid double because I did the cake perfect, right? So this is the exact same way that you want to approach our technical interviews. Once that problem is presented to you, bake a chocolate cake. Now we want to take that information and break it down in a way that is not only received by your interviewer, but again, authentically true to you and how you would bake that cake. Because somebody might say, you know what? I'm not a good baker, so I'm actually going to go to Kroger and pick up the cake and then have it delivered right before on a dish, right? The result is the same, but the approach is different. And that's exactly what we want to hear about. Okay. Perfect. Next up, we want to also think about your approach in a way where if you are stuck on anything, sometimes you've given enough hints, you've already shared that you can't, maybe you can't arrive at a solution right away. It is totally fine to say that during your interviews as well. So I'm thinking about two different solutions, this one and this one. I'm not sure which one is the best. Completely fine to do during an interview. And again, a lot of times it may come as, you know, for some, they might see that as, oh my gosh, I don't know the answer. How am I going to get out of this? It's during our interviews, it is completely fine for you to say, look, I have two ideas in my head. I'm not sure which one is the best, because again, you're giving your interviewer some more insight into who you are and how you approach problems. Okay. The next thing you want to do is make sure you're listening to your interviewer. Leading questions are hints. So a lot of times, if they're already asking you follow-up questions, or if they're kind of guiding you in a direction that you're kind of flowing with, really understand what the underlying question is. 9 times out of 10, they're throwing out hints at you to make sure that you stay on course and that you're in line with where you know, you're answering the question. So make sure you're really listening to them throughout your interview times with us. If you run out of thinking, again, don't be afraid to ask for a hint. And your interviewers are there to help you. So they're never there to trick you or trap you in any way, but you want to make sure that you're letting them in on not only what your thought process is, but also opening up the floor for them to be able to share what their thoughts are as well, which they will. Another one that is super, super important to remember is do not become demoralized, okay? Our interviews, questions, and our interviews in general can be very, very difficult. But if I had anything else to tell you today, it is do not let imposter syndrome creep in. Do not ever feel like you don't know what you're doing because you're not able to arrive at any one particular solution. Again, we are not looking for perfection, but we are looking for people who are hungry, who are curious, who are not afraid to challenge the status quo, right? And with that comes some times where you might be stumped, right? But that's what makes you great, is that you're stumped, but it doesn't stop you. And that's what we want to hear during that interview. Bring all of that in. And don't become demoralized, right? Don't forget that you know what you're doing. Getting to an on-site interview alone is huge. So don't ever forget that you know what you're doing, that you're super, super talented and absolutely incredible at what you do. And if for any reason during any interview you feel stumped, admitting that and offering a different solution is just as good. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we progress. All right, so a couple of things as well is the languages that you could choose during your interviews. Now, we allow you to choose whichever language it is that you are comfortable with. And then you're aligned to interviewers who are also super proficient in that language. So your technical interviews may cover anything from logic problems to data structures and algorithms. But let's say you get an algorithm question. It is so important to share out loud with your interviewer what approaches could you take to answer this type of question, how you would sort, search, or represent or solve the problem that was presented to you, or what is the efficiency of this data structure slash algorithm. Again, thinking out loud. This can feel strange at first because it's not something that you typically do. But I tell all of my candidates, again, as you're doing these mock problems and preparing, talk out loud so that on the day of, it feels super natural to you, and talk the way that you normally would in your space, right? There's no need to say it in a way where, you know, your interviewer is feeling, you know, that it's not you. If you just kind of throw out ideas, then do it on your interview day, but make sure it's you. And the best way to do that is to practice. Another thing I'd share with you that a lot of people don't know that we offer is something called our Champ Calls. And it's during this time you can choose to speak with a Google engineer prior to your interview, and find out what they did to prepare for their Google interview. Learn more about what a day in the life is like for a software engineer in a day, or, you know, what tools and programs they use to prepare. And this will help you to begin to really visualize yourself during your interview, understanding your approach and how best to respond to different questions as well. Perfect. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what not to worry about. Okay, we are not trying to confuse you with language trivia. So don't worry about syntax or punctuation. We want the substance of your code to shine through. Okay. You won't be asked to answer any short answer questions, so only open-ended problem-solving questions during your technical and non-technical interviews. Again, you don't want to worry too much about syntax or punctuation. We want you to write real code, not just pseudocode. Okay, cool. Now, let's talk about what your interviewer is considering during your technical interview. Okay, perfect. Let's do this. All right. Now, during your interview, your interviewer is going to be considering a host of things. The first is your coding proficiency. So, are you proficient in the programming language and programming patterns and practices? So again, this goes back to you being able to choose the language that you're most comfortable to code in. And this is where you want to make sure it's a strength of yours, right? So if you really, really don't like Java, but you really, really love C++, go with C++ that day. The whole idea of this technical interview, and just really interviews in general, is that you're coming in with the advantage, right? You are bringing everything that you have ever learned and taught and mentored and tutored others in. You're bringing all of that into a full day of interviews. So you have so much to bring to the table. And so we're also allowing you at that point to choose the language that you're most comfortable in as well. And so really you're coming in with everything that makes you who you are as a coder, but also as a potential employee too. Next up is code efficiency, is what they'll also be considering during your interviews as well. So are you finding the optimal solution for the problem? So are you choosing the best data structure? Are you understanding the factors that influence that choice? Why are you choosing that choice? Why are you approaching it this way? So how efficient are you? Are you getting to the solution that is going to get us our resolution the fastest? Or did you take a little bit of a longer route? If so, why? So really understanding, again, who you are, that thought process, why you make the decisions that you're making. Are you thinking short term? Are you thinking long term? How big can this code go? What is your scalability? What is the scalability of your code? So really understanding what that efficiency is, and you having an understanding of why you're choosing to go in that direction is vital. And they're going to be looking for that. The other thing that your interviewer is going to be looking for is your code readability. So is it good? Is it redundant? Is it overly complex? How easy is it to read your code? And the best thing I tell candidates to do when you're approaching our technical interviews is, if you were to go on vacation for 2 weeks, can another software engineer come in and take over where you left off? And that is what you really want to kind of have, that mentality when you're approaching our interviews, is how can I make this easy for all if I were to go on vacation for 2 weeks? Do you have clear technical articulation of design? Can you break down the problem into small steps and know what code to write for each step? So again, this goes back to your ability to be able to clearly communicate your thoughts. Do you have an understanding of not only the problem that was presented to you, but do you have a clear process in place for you to be able to get to a resolution to that problem? And can you communicate that clearly? Is another thing that your interviewer is going to be looking for. Finally, your computational thinking and problem solving. Can you logically order and analyze data? Okay, so can you take a bunch of information, organize it, and then communicate it after analyzing that data? So they're going to be looking, again, for you to be able to take some ambiguous information, and what do you do with it at that point? And finally, probably the most important bullet point is confidence and inquisitiveness. Your interviewer is going to be looking for that, right? Are you asking problems to clarify, or asking questions to clarify problems? Can you be confident in your abilities and not be afraid to ask questions? Are you confident in your solutions? And I'm telling you, more than anything, this is where I kind of alluded to it before in my last slide. Being confident in your abilities and your capabilities, even if you're not 100% sure of the answer, is key, right? Because we all know that you know how to code. We know that you know what you're doing, but it's being able to communicate those thoughts out loud so that someone else can follow you is what's key. And so being inquisitive, asking questions, not being afraid to say, I don't know, but this is what I'm thinking. And being confident in all of that is another thing that your interviewer is going to be looking for. Okay. Cool. Now, let's talk about steps for acing the interview. And I'm just going to take a quick pause because I thank you. First of all, thank you all for the questions. I see them coming in. Perfect. Okay, so we will get through this as well. Great, keep the questions coming if you have them, and I will get to them as we progress, okay? So thank you for popping these in. Okay, so these are 4 steps that I believe, and I definitely communicate this to my candidates every time I'm on the phone prepping with them. But these are the 4 things that you want to really, really remember for any interview that you do with us that is considered a technical interview, okay? And there are 4 things. It's clarifying the question, designing your solution, writing your code, and testing your code. These are the 4 steps to acing the technical interview, and it's a good idea to keep the above steps in mind because while each question for each interview that you're presented will be different, these general steps will help you frame the conversation and help you approach your question, as well as giving your interviewer everything that they need in order to get enough data for the feedback. So if you kind of focus in on these 4 steps here, you'll find that one will keep all of your thoughts very organized, but you'll also be hitting every mark that your interviewer will be looking for that we kind of chatted about in the previous slide. So let's talk about each one, okay? The first thing is clarifying the question. So I know you're probably like, Jennifer, we've heard this, but I want to break it down a little bit more for you, because what's super, super important here is understanding what is being asked of you. Sometimes when you're being presented a question, it can sound vague. It can sound like some information is missing. And so we want to make sure that you're capturing that, right? We want to make sure that you're taking a deeper dive into what is being asked of you. And many times we see candidates who don't understand a question, or they just jump right into a solution, and they can't waste time answering the wrong question. 45 minutes flies by in a blink of an eye. And so the point of asking those clarifying questions is to really make sure that you're on the path to getting to the most efficient solution as quickly as possible, both for you and your interviewer, but in a way where you're not sacrificing the quality of your code. And so the way that you do that is to ask those clarifying questions, really gain some insight into what's being asked of you, and then going ahead and walking through your thoughts, okay? It's so important, again, to make sure that you're clarifying, because you do not want to go down the wrong path. And then before you know it, you have 10 minutes left and there's not enough time to put really good code together. Your interviewer can also help you clarify and provide hints if you find yourself stuck at this step, and what solution you want to design. But this right here is really what helps solve a lot of initial problems when trying to get through solving your solution, getting to a solution. Next is design. So now you've asked your clarifying questions. It's important to plan and design your solution. So you don't want to just jump right into coding. You notice I have yet to tell you to start to code. You've already had some dialogue. You've thought through with your clarifying questions. Now it's time to put that thinking out loud to action. And then I think I did see a question in the chat feature if there are any design questions. So this is going to vary depending on the level that you are interviewing with us. So if you come in, a lot of our early career candidates, typically around L3s, some L4 roles do not have design questions. They are what's called our general software engineering interviews, where we cover everything from coding to data structures and algorithms. And typically, as you begin to progress through each level, that is where design is going to be incorporated into your interviews, systems design. Now, your recruiter will walk you through a prep call. So if your interview will have some design questions on there, they will walk you through the best way to prepare for that. But usually our entry-level early career candidates do not have design on their interviews, but they will need to be prepared to answer a design type of question. So I just tell people, prepare for it all. It's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And if you do not have Cracking the Coding interview yet, it's a book. It's a pretty thick book. I have it somewhere around here. But if you don't have that book, grab it. It's a great resource to have. Great place to start for mock problems and really understanding the technical piece. And then it gives you some time to learn how to incorporate those technical pieces in with your own flavor. Okay, and so it's back to designing a solution. So it is completely okay to start with a brute force solution and then improve upon it. You can consider and discuss trade-offs to your solution. So how would you improve your solution? How would you make it faster? Would you use less memory? So all of those things are great to be able to speak to, but don't forget to talk through your algorithms and performances and start thinking about edge cases for your solution as well during this time. again, it's super important to think out loud. So it's during this time where you're going to have a lot of dialogue with your interviewer. Usually this is the part of the interview where some hints are being thrown out, and just a lot of Q&A between you and your interviewer, them asking you questions to take you a little bit deeper in your solution and really stretch you during this interview process. And so it's usually during the second part where you're talking out loud and letting them in on the visual to your solution, is where you'll typically find a lot of follow-up questions and dialogue occurring during this time. The third piece is now you can finally start to write your code, okay? So once you've asked those clarifying questions, you've designed and talked through your solution, now it's time to implement your solution and write your code. And so it's a good idea to break your solution into smaller parts, with the use of helper functions, which is totally fine. And then it's okay to continue to have a conversation with your interviewer and ask them questions or hints too. So if you notice, the dialogue never stops. You're constantly speaking to your interviewer throughout this process. Again, incorporating who you are, being inquisitive, pushing yourself past your comfort zone. So all of that is occurring during your interview. The dialogue never should stop. It goes from clarifying questions to now talking through your code to now walking them through your code as you're doing it. And so you're constantly letting them in on your thought process. Finally, it is now time to test the code. And so now you, of course, don't want to assume that your code works. You need to test it, which you'll do manually during our interview. So you're going to walk your interviewer through your code line by line, using your edge cases from earlier. So if you remember, we kind of chatted a little bit about getting that in your mind already. So you're going to chat them through those edge cases and try to run at least 1 or 2 test cases to check your work. But if you realize that there are more ways, maybe as you're going through it, you realize, hey, I can do this better, I can do this more efficient, let them know, right? It's okay to pivot. We want to see it. Cool. So just a couple of things that I kind of want to throw out, which would be your final kind of best practice tips, and some common mistakes that you really want to try to avoid. Number one, again, it's to explain everything. So you always want to err on the side of over communicating with your interviewer, always. It's better, again, to be over prepared and over communicate than to under deliver. Next, clarify. Many questions will be open-ended. So you can, again, leaving space for interpretation. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Nothing is silly. Nothing is off limits, because it's how you think, right? It's not about what your interviewer thinks. It's not about what, we're not looking, again, for an exact response, but it's about what you bring to this particular problem and how you want to solve it. Okay. Next is improve. So you want to think about ways that you can improve. We understand that nothing is ever final. There's always going to be someone that can figure something out better, who can figure a more efficient way to do something. And so always open that up. Don't be afraid to improve, and then practice, right? There are no shortcuts to this. Make sure to practice as you prepare. And a couple of mistakes that you really want to try to avoid, again, just to kind of recap, jumping into code. That should be the third thing that you do. You want to clarify, design, and then code. So keep that in mind as you begin to give yourself practice problems. Not discussing examples or not thinking or testing through your code is another mistake a lot of people make. Really take that time to break your code down. Discuss how your code will crash or fail or run infinitely, overflowing the stack. Like, really walk your interviewer through all kinds of things as you begin to test your code. Run through an example. Don't be afraid to, break your code down, discuss how your code will crash, or analyze the complexity of your code. And if time allows, have a code walkthrough with your interviewer and discuss these improvements that you can make. And if you notice, again, the floor is open to interpretation. And so it's okay if you come to a different solution. Voice that, let it out, and let your interviewer in. Another mistake to avoid is not writing real code. So if it's agreed upon with your interviewer, pseudocode can be used to communicate initial thinking, but eventually you want to make sure that you're actually writing real lines of code. And finally, not understanding the question or prematurely optimizing. Another huge thing I see with candidates: do not rush. I know it sounds counterintuitive because you're being timed, but take the few minutes in the beginning to gather your thoughts, to understand what's being asked of you. And again, now you're tying all of your thoughts to your why. So when you do respond, you're already in line with what matters to you, what feels right to you, and it's coming off in the most natural way possible. Okay, perfect. So just a couple of things before we kind of get to Q&A here. How to apply. So now that you know what to expect, now you're ready to roll with us. It's time to apply. So you want to start by heading over to our careers.google.com page. This is really where you can find the best role for you. This is also a great time to sign up for any alerts. So if there is a role that you don't see posted right now, sign up for alerts so that you are alerted. But also, and a lot of people don't know this, there are a ton of resources on our careers page that help you prepare for the role that you're looking for. You get to learn more about our locations, groups that we have here. So it really allows you to learn more about the Google culture, who we are, what we do, but also any events that we have. So we have something called Careers on Air, where recruiters will come on and speak directly to candidates through live stream events where you can learn more about roles and who we are and interview tips and all of that good stuff. And so it's so much more than just a careers page. It really is a place for you to be able to learn a little bit more about Google. Of course, uploading a copy of your resume, and then as simple as that, you want to go ahead and click submit. And then I want to make sure that I talk to you a little bit about, well, this was about the alerts, but if you sign up at the top, this is just a visual of what the alerts look like. You can turn them on and you will be alerted for any roles that are popping up or any events that we have as well. So it's super, super easy. Just wanted to make sure I threw that out there. And then I made mention of the Google Careers on Air. It's a really cool website. And so it houses all of our live and on-demand virtual events where you can learn more about Google and build tech and non-tech skills. So we have presentations, we have resources there. A lot of people don't know about this, and it's just a really, really great place to start. And so many of our sessions have live speakers. I've actually done a few as well, live Q&A, chat moderators. And so you want to make sure that you're registered for these events. They are completely free and they air as live streams. So just another opportunity to prepare for your interview beforehand. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not talk about LinkedIn. And so one thing that I try to stress to everyone is that a lot of recruiters use LinkedIn to connect with candidates and to really partner with them as they begin to help them look for opportunities. And so to increase your chances of getting noticed by recruiters, consider leveraging LinkedIn, okay, if you haven't already. LinkedIn is such an incredible resource for networking, for keeping up in the day in the life content of some of your favorites who are working at companies that you're looking to be at, as well as tips on getting into Google. Our page in particular highlights different Googlers and how they were able to get through their interviews, and they share tips as well. So it's a great place to be connected and learn more. And then of course, you can also upload your most current information there. But this is also where I tell people this is the perfect time to incorporate your personality. If you love donuts, having a profile picture of you eating donuts is cool. Like, go for it. We want to see who you are. If coding is something that you absolutely love doing, talk about that. Post articles about the newest technology. Really start to stand apart, set yourself apart as a subject matter expert in whatever it is that you're passionate about. If you just happen to be a coder, but you also love gaming, talk about that, right? And this, again, will draw attention to your LinkedIn page. It'll draw people near you to want to learn more about you. And because they're learning more about you in this outside space, when it comes time to interviewing or when it comes time to connect with a recruiter, now we have some talking points. Now we can learn more about what makes you tick and what makes you excited and passionate about the work that you're doing, which is then being communicated to your hiring manager, right? So now everything about you precedes you, so that on the day of the interview, your interviewer is able to bring those things up and talk more about what makes you excited about the work that you do. Again, making it so much easier for you to be authentically true to who you are when you have these opportunities. And finally, I just want to say thank you. That is all that I had for you today. And so the floor is now open. I'm going to go through questions. I can answer really everything around what I discussed today, but I am not technical. So I will answer as many questions as I can, as long as they're like not writing a line of code. And then you're also more than welcome to come off the mute if you prefer to have, like, ask me a question outside of the chat feature. You're more than welcome to do that as well. And I'm also happy to answer any questions about me too. So if you have any questions about me, I can answer that as well. Charlene, I have time for questions, right? Am I pushing it?
You absolutely do. I was going to help you to go through them because you've had so many questions come in. And I just want to say a huge thank you as well for the fantastic session that's run. Really, really informative. I'm tempted to have a go at applying as well. So thank you.
Oh, good. So happy.
So we've got loads of questions. So our first one was, what do you mean by Googliness, your Google values?
Yes. And so when you're thinking about Googliness, it really is a state of mind for us here at Google. It is a term that's been coined by Googlers, and it is really how we approach our work every day. So we think big, we think outside of the box, we think about everyone. When we're thinking about building a product, or even when I'm working with my candidates, it's not just that one person I'm thinking about. It's how is this interaction impacting the billions other people that I could potentially impact by hiring this one person. So it's always thinking ahead. It's never assuming the worst, right? So if someone didn't email you back right away, a lot of times we're quick to say, why didn't they respond? But at Google, the thought process is, hey, maybe they're working on a project and they need a minute, or let me send another email, just a friendly bump in case they missed it. So it's just really understanding who we are as a company and being there for each other, and understanding that individual work is just as important as it is to collaborate as a team in order for us to get far.
Thank you. That sounds lovely. I know that I could do with people thinking that I accidentally missed an email or that I'm busy.
It happens, right?
I've got a question here. There's loads, so I'm going to skip some and just try and get through as many as I can. Does Google plan to offer a mentoring program for Black females keen to join SWE? Is that software engineering? Yeah.
Yes. So I know that, because there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about in my head. I know that we obviously do several different programs. We are, connected to a lot of different groups and schools to make sure that we are providing mentorship opportunities. But there are a lot of things that you can find from us that I mentioned on that careers page and on our LinkedIn page, where you're really able to start to tap into events. I know, for instance, our team just hosted a Women at Google event where we had software engineers, female software engineers from Google, come in and just talk to other aspiring SWE engineers. And so that was crazy, SWEs. And so it really is, I hesitate because it won't be one-on-one necessarily, unless you physically reach out to, you know, a software engineer at Google and personally ask for that mentorship. But Google definitely has its footprint in a lot of different areas. It's just about getting connected to the right groups in order to gain that experience and mentorship. And then, of course, we have programs and internships as well. But I would highly, highly encourage you to follow our Life at Google social media. And I don't want to keep sounding like I'm pushing social media off, but there is a lot of resources that I think a lot of people miss that we actually post that help get you what you're looking for. So if there is a program that's happening or someone available for mentorship, it's going to come through our social media channels.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have another question. I'm going to combine this one. So do you prefer generalist software engineers, or do you prefer people that have a particular language that they know? So C# or C, Python, what sort of people are you looking for?
Ooh, that's good. Okay, so this question, so let me back up a little bit. What's really, really cool about a Google interview is that everyone gets the same foundational software engineering interview, because the idea is once you're in the door, mobility is super, super easy, right? Because we believe if you're a software engineer for YouTube, you should easily be able to be a software engineer for Google Ads or Google Chrome or Cloud, right? Now, it's if a team requires something, so maybe there's a team that specializes in machine learning, it's at that time during your interview that your recruiter may have a domain-specific interview incorporated versus, so it's nothing different except an addition to your interview where we'll be interviewing you for your machine learning skills, but every engineer has the same interview at Google. Now, there is, the languages, they vary depending on the team. So some teams might use C++, where one might use something a little bit different. So that again would be determined by your recruiter, depending on which requisition that they're looking to fill. So that's something that they would be discussing with you. But there isn't one particular language that you really want to hone in on for us. It's really about understanding those foundational computer science fundamentals that is going to be super, super important to our interview, because at the end of the day, it's about good, clean code and getting able to communicate your thoughts clearly. If there's anything specific that your interviewer is going to be looking for, or a team, for instance, is going to be looking for, it's at that time your recruiter will let you know and guide you in the right way to prepare.
Fantastic.
I hope that answers the question.
That's really answered it.
Oh, good.
I hope that Flora and Genevieve, you've had your questions answered. That technical interview practice resource by any chance? I think my internet was unstable for a bit. Did you hear me okay?
I was just about to ask you to repeat because it did go out just a little bit.
Is there a Google technical interview practice resource by any chance that people could use?
No, there isn't. But gosh, I need to figure. One of my candidates actually told me, and now I'm drawing a blank. I know there's like a place where, and this is the non-technical side of me coming out, but just roll with me. I know there's a place where a lot of candidates go to do practice problems for coding, but there isn't anything specific to Google that you can do.
Okay. So yeah, I know that there's like Code Wars, Kerrang, places like that.
Yes.
Exorcism's another good one as well.
Yes.
Exorcism, sorry. So they're probably the sort of thing that we were talking about.
Absolutely. That's where you want to go. And then I just want to kind of, I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but don't be afraid to time yourself.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I delayed. Okay to carry on.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just saying how important it is to make sure you're timing yourself. In the beginning, as you're beginning to practice, totally fine. Don't time yourself. Just feel the vibes, right? Just go with it. Make the mistakes. Fall into solving the problems. But as you start to get yourself warmed up and you're getting more comfortable, it is imperative that you set a timer for 40 minutes in the comfort of your home, talk out loud, and really put yourself, such a visual person, so visualize yourself in that interview. How do you sound, right? Think about, like, listen to yourself as you're kind of walking through these problems and envision being the interviewer. So how do you sound? Are your thoughts concise? Are they clear? Do you sound confident in your solution? So really kind of using this time to practice is perfect.
Awesome, thank you. And
Yeah.
I think during the session you were talking about doing an interview. So someone's asked, how do you redo your interview process? Do you just reach out again to your recruiter to rebook an interview again?
Yes. So is that okay? So we'll do it this way. If you're only, there would only be, one of two reasons. One is either you needed to reschedule your interview. So if that's the case, yes, you would reach out directly to the recruiter that you were working with. Now, if things don't go as planned after you interview with us the first time, and maybe you need to interview with us again, typically, and your recruiter will give you, the lowdown, if you will. But most times we ask candidates to wait 1 year after they interview in order for us to have you re-interview with us again. And it's during that time you just reapply. You do not go back to the same recruiter most of the time. So you end up reapplying and just going through the process again. And that's usually 1 year after you interview with us if things don't go as planned. But your recruiter will walk you through what that looks like. And in some of them, I know I have, in most cases, have told candidates to reach out to me directly if they are interested. But for the most part, just reapplying is good.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And
Yeah.
can you write down thoughts as comments in code? I think this question came in when you were talking about the fact that you doodle and you might think by different ways, you might want to write things down. Can you do that with the code as well? So can you write comments
Yes.
in your code as thought?
Absolutely. We want it all. And so you'll actually using something similar to a Google document, but it's like times 10. And so that is where you'll actually enter in your lines of code, but there is space for you to jot down thoughts or, just kind of work through a quick code before you actually put in your actual code. As long as you're communicating that with your interviewer, that is perfectly fine. And actually we encourage it.
Fantastic. And how does a virtual whiteboarding coding test work? Will we have to code using a Word doc?
It's similar to a web doc. The only thing is it's actually, I shouldn't even say that. It's a lot like a Google document. So basically you'll get this link before your interview is scheduled to start. And in it allows your interviewer to watch you code in real time. So it is almost like having a shared doc. And they'll be able to watch you code, but then at the same time, it's almost like a whiteboarding session, like a Jamboard, if you will. And so then you'll be able to put all of your code in and your interviewer can watch you code as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Does Google consider self-taught candidates and those without computer science degrees and masters?
Yes, we do. Yes. And I don't even think I mentioned this. I don't have a degree. And so, yes, we absolutely do. And I think one of the most beautiful things about it is companies, and not just Google, but just companies in general. I'm sure you all have noticed and felt it, but they're understanding now that there are many different ways to get to a solution, right? Everyone doesn't necessarily have to have a computer science degree. It's great to have, but maybe you went to a boot camp. Maybe I saw someone mention they were in finance and now they're ready to switch. I just had a candidate who was an English major decide after graduating with their degree that they were into tech. And so they went back to a boot camp, received a certification, and he just signed his offer last month. And so you have to just put yourself in a space to where you're being mentored. You might have to go to a couple of fairs or events. Try to immerse yourself in any way to get your foot in the door if you do not have a computer science degree. But please, please, I can't stress this enough. If you don't have it, you can still be considered. Go to these boot camps, get a certification. We offer Coursera courses as well. And so really, that's what I mean by immersing yourself. Find the different avenues that you would need in order to help your resume show up. But you can absolutely be considered without a computer science degree.
That's fantastic news. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does the technical interview also involve design questions?
Yes. So it does depend on the level that you're interviewing for. Most of our early career candidates, typically between levels 3 and 4, do not see design in their interview, but they should be prepared to answer a design type of question. So something around object-oriented design could pop up during your interview. Any interview and I said L3, L4, it does vary. I know L3 for sure does not have any systems design interview, but if you're interviewing for a 4 or 5 and up, for sure, you should be prepared to have a systems design interview.
Amazing, thanks.
Yeah.
What are some of the most difficult questions you were asked in your Google interviews?
Ooh. Gosh, I don't even remember. Hold on. One, I don't remember the exact question, but I can tell you what made it difficult.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was the hypothetical questions, the ones that hadn't happened to me yet. Those can be a little tricky to answer, and that goes for any of our interviews, because I'm someone who can go down a rabbit hole with my thoughts. Like, I can start thinking about one thing and then it'll become like 20. And so the hard part for me was tailoring that to where I didn't sound like I was crazy during my interview, but that I still had a very complete thought process. It was just very vivid. And I think that's why the topic today is so important to me, because I don't think the way everybody else thinks, right? I'm not very black and white in my thought process. It is very colorful, very vivid. I can take one word and it can become an entire day of research. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily the questions that were being asked. It was how to master gathering every single thought in my brain, but communicating it in a way that it made sense, right? Because sometimes when we're talking to ourselves, it makes sense, but then when it comes out, the other person is left like, what? And so for me, it was understanding who I was, being confident in that, knowing that I can do all of these things. Now, how do I tailor this in a way where I don't sound like I haven't had a complete thought, but that I do, and that I'm passionate about my work. And so that was the hard part for me the third time around that I finally got it. But it is just really understanding who I was and showing up unapologetically in my interview, but in a way that I had to learn to shorten my responses. And that was hard for me, because I always feel like I have to tell everything for people in order for people to get a good picture. And that's not true.
Okay, thank you. That's really good advice, actually. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we've got somebody here who says they've got tech experience, but mainly in finance. What could she add to her CV to make it stand out?
In finance, but in the tech space, so I understand? In the tech space, but just in finance.
So still tech experience, but in finance, not in this industry.
Yeah, okay. So, one of the things that I tell people to do is, it sounds very silly, but start with the job description, right? Find the job that you're eventually that you want, right? So let's say, I'll just use me as an example. I was not a recruiter. I worked in retail for the longest. And no degree, right? And so now I want to become a recruiter. How do I take my experience in retail and tailor it to where if someone's looking at it, they can say they don't see retail management, they see a potential recruiter. And so that's where you have to start looking at the job description. Really take a deep dive into what's being listed in the responsibilities in that particular role that you're looking for. Now take those responsibilities, take a look at what you're currently doing, and now work that in. So I went from talking about hitting my monthly, goals at work, because we have a dollar amount that we had to make in retail. So that was what was on my resume, but I stopped talking about that and I talked about having to recruit for the Christmas season. How did I recruit sales associates for my floor? And then I started talking about I know that recruiters have to collaborate. They have to work with different people. So I talked about how I collaborated with other stores in the area to make sure that we were hitting our quota. So it's really about taking what you already have and just reworking it to match. And I'm not lying, right? I'm just rewording things. So now my resume is going from a strict retail management resume to now taking the things that I was already doing in my role, but switching them and making them more recruiter related. So if this person is in finance, but still on the tech level, so you're already ahead of the game there. Now you just want to take a look at the potential role that you're wanting to get into, and also start fishing on LinkedIn. Find someone who's in the role that you're in. And if they even have the same background as you, take a look at what they've done. No need to recreate the wheel, but just learn to take what you're currently doing and reworking that thing to where it aligns with the role that you're looking to get into.
Amazing. So also look at those transferable skills that you've got from one industry that you could take to the other one as well. Amazing.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, you better than anyone else. Right. And so sometimes when we sit down and do our resumes, we do them because they're long, right? It takes a long time to do a resume properly, but take that time. Really take a deep dive into what you've done. This is not the time to sugarcoat or water anything that you've done down. If you mentored or onboarded new people, I know most of us on this chat have taken someone new under their wing and helped them onboard for a week or two. You put that on your resume, right? Mm-hmm. That is a part of your responsibilities, but it's also showing that leadership without the title of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. The next question, what does the interview process look like for non-SWE coding heavy roles, such as professional cloud architect?
So to be very honest with you, would not be the best person to answer that question, only because I only work on the SWE side of things. And so I would encourage you to head over to, I think there's on that careers page, you can click on Google Cloud specifically, and then it should walk you through what they look for in that particular role or just in general. But I would not be the best person to answer that question.
Thank you. We have got somebody who wanted clarity around the L levels. You were talking about L levels earlier.
Yes. So when you start to get into a lot of the larger companies, like in the tech space, they have different levels. So you have L2, L3, L4, and basically the best way to word it is almost it establishes what that level should be able to do in this particular role. So they take a lot of your experience, how you interview, your thought process, and is this someone who is better starting off at Google at a level 3, or is this someone who could start at a level 4? Right. And then that's how you kind of progress. So the higher level you are, the more obviously responsibility you have. And then there's this expectation that, an L3 may not be as good as communicating their technical thoughts, but they can. Whereas an L7, I would expect them to very clearly be able to communicate their technical thoughts, write good, clean code in a short amount of time. You know what I mean? So it's almost like helping to establish what the responsibilities are and what the expectation would be for that particular level.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. So essentially it's kind of as though you were thinking of junior engineers, software engineers, senior, and so on, and then looking at what responsibilities that person would have.
Yep. And that's
Awesome.
another thing too, as you begin to explore the tech space. I know Google in particular, we're not very big on like titles. And so you're not going to find like an L7 engineer in an office with a door and like their name on the outside. It's not like they sit out with everyone else kind of vibe. And so it really is, it's not necessarily to establish like hierarchy. It really just helps to determine what someone should be responsible for and what the expectations should be.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Someone's asked how much, what the headcount at Google has, and do you know how much headcount Google has annually, and how many software engineers do you recruit annually?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. No, I can't even think of that. I can tell you, I know my team in particular, we had some crazy numbers last year, but I never know what the exact is. So no, I'm not able to answer that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess you also have also got a very separate, almost like separate businesses within the business. So yeah,
you took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah, and that's exactly why. Because after I said it, I'm like, this probably makes no sense as to why I don't know. But Charlene, you nailed it. That's exactly why. So while you all see Google as a whole, there are several businesses within that, right? So you have Google Cloud, Google Early Career, you have Google Ads, Google Chrome, YouTube, who each have their own goals and heads to fill. And so it's a number I have no clue.
Okay, thanks. What would be the best platform to study algorithms and data structures? So I think during the interview process, you were saying that was a really key part of it.
It is, yeah. You know what? I can actually, because I think you actually mentioned it earlier. There are several sites where you can go and do mock problems. And that is where, hold on, I'm pulling something up really quick. Yep. Okay. So LeetCode, which I think I saw someone write in the comments, is great to prepare for technical interviews, and Topcoder.
Topcoder. Okay.
Yep. It's another great place to do it. I had to go back and look at my notes. Yep. And someone already mentioned LeetCode. I believe I saw that in the comments. So they're
I've seen that in the chat a few times now, actually.
Yep. Yeah. That's where you want to be.
Excellent. So Topcoder, LeetCode, prepare that way. Fantastic. Yep. Well, that's all the questions.
Don't forget the book. Gosh, I'm telling you not to forget, and I forgot.
Interview. Oh, I can't remember. Something, the technical interview.
Yep, it's a very thick book. I'm just gonna throw this in there because it's so important and it's so good.
Is that the Cracking the Coding interview book?
Yes, that's it. Cracking the Coding interview. It's green and it's very thick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Oh, that seems fantastic.
Get it. It'll help you.
Okay, fantastic. In fact, what we did used to do at our events was we would do a little raffle and let somebody win a prize. So I think we'll do that this time as well. I'll send out a form afterwards and somebody can win Cracking the Coding interview because it comes highly recommended.
Yes, I'm telling you.
So thank you very much for that.
You're so welcome. I can't thank you, honestly, for just this opportunity. I hope you all found it valuable. I really enjoyed myself. So just thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to come and share with you today.
It's been amazing to have you. Thank you. I know everybody's found it extremely beneficial. And hopefully we'll get to do more things like this in the future as well. So share some more tips with people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer.